Hey, Josh, how are you?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you today?
I'm good, thanks. Civic leaders either get it or they don't regarding
Mhm.
the arts. For those of us out here who perhaps are not in a forward thinking, as we would hope, environment, how can we position ourselves in a way to show that we are the forefront of revitalization or economic development, that we're a mainstay? You need us there.
I think case studies are one of the perfect examples of how to do that because when the evidence is directly in front of you and the success of a community that is arts and culture forward is laid out directly in front of you, it's really hard to deny the evidence that's there. The unique thing about our community is that we had a change in administration that was even more arts forward and saw the arts as a way to drive the economy itself to revitalize the downtown. And we immediately started ramp up programming until the pandemic hit and then immediately launched right back into heavy programming for the center. But we were able to take advantage of the downtime to establish the arts in many different ways throughout the pandemic, using the organization of the theater while the theater was closed to then promote other forms of art and other aspects of arts and culture within the community.
And I would love to explore that a little bit deeper because during my advocacy work in the pandemic, I really thought that if ever we were to have a time that we can revolutionize, adjust, reimagine how we advocate for the arts, how we invest, how we value the arts, it would have been during the pandemic. And I was surprised and a little bit disappointed to see some organizations just kind of fall back to pre-pandemic status quo. We've always done it this way sort of ideal. Tell me a little bit about how you took advantage of the pandemic to push forward and explore new areas, which then it sounds like you're benefiting from that now.
Tremendously. Initially, we were one of the first programs in the country to immediately jump into the virtual programming. And that was our initial, hey, we are here for you, for the community. And so we did that to stay in touch with the community initially. And as all virtual programming did, the newness and the uniqueness of it wore off within a few months. And then we paired with the library here in town to start a community story walk on the square itself. The community story walk has continued to develop. There are now permanent fixtures for the story walk. Initially, we were just putting up pages of the books in store windows downtown within merchants' windows downtown. Now it has progressed to where there are permanently installed displays for that story walk. And then we continued that and did outdoor concerts, outdoor events. And then one thing that I had always wanted to do was create a mural in the alleyway outside of our venue, because it is a walking path to get to the venue from different parking areas. And a lot of people walked it, but it was a pretty kind of shifty looking alley. And so reclaiming a wall there and putting a mural on a wall there, lighting it, making sure the alley is well lit, completely changed the face of that. Within the process of painting that very first mural, we realized that there were about 750 people walked up to watch us paint. And people were heavily invested in the mural, both social media wise and in person from a distance while it was happening. And that kind of birthed a mural movement. The city invested $100,000 in artist fees to pay artists to come in and to put up murals in our community. In addition, I became a salaried mural artist for the city while the Marion Cultural and Civic Center was shuttered.
So it sounds like to me, you were thinking like a business where we look at this line of business or this distribution channel, if you will, of our work has stopped. So how do we get the work out in other channels? Are you still proceeding that way today with that mindset?
I mean, we've gone back to indoor programming, and we do a variety of different programs to try and address every different aspect of the community. But then we're also working on how we can continue to progress with things within the community. The one thing with that beautified alley, we're starting to do free public concerts as a pre-concert event to events within the Civic Center. So we're now pairing outdoor free events with paid events, and they play just during the hour and a half prior to the start of the paid show that's inside of the Civic Center. And we're doing it in that beautified alleyway in front of the mural, and it is creating additional foot traffic that wouldn't have been there before. And so once again, it's foot traffic by means of the arts.
So what are you seeing as a result of the free pre-event leading up to the paid event?
We are seeing higher community interaction and a higher presence downtown than we typically would have had with the show. People spending more time walking around in our downtown square in front of those businesses than they would have before. Whereas before they would have gone to a restaurant and then gone straight to the theater.
And is that something that you did in conjunction with knowing what the city wanted, or were you trying to do it to increase ticket sales? Like, again, give me a little bit of that.
There's no correlation to ticket sales for us. I'd say 3/4 of the people that are attending those free outdoor things are not buying tickets, but it is creating more events, more buzz, more connection to our community in the downtown area than we had before.
Which is in itself what we need to do, right? We don't want to be this behind a brick wall or within four walls and no one really knows what's going on, but there's this kind of seamless overflow or energy that's happening, right?
Yeah, there is, and that's the one thing that inside of the building that we've noticed as well is that there's a higher energy with the audience prior to the show starting than there was without that outdoor. So it creates a better audience experience inside the doors than was there before because they're bringing the overflow of that energy some of them just by walking by that music as they're coming in. They're coming in with a different mindset into the space. So we're extending that customer experience from just when they come in the door to hundreds of yards from them walking into the building.
How is marketing going? We hear a lot about aging audience, or we can't reach the millennial Gen Z. How do you deal with that with your marketing?
Over 50% of our budget now is into digital marketing through either Google Ad, through OTT, or through your standard social media marketing, Facebook, Instagram. The return is much more quantifiable within those streams of marketing. The shift that we have is if it's an older audience, we will actually pay for specific morning news spots on the local television channel, but we won't do things spread across different programs on there anymore. We'll dedicate more towards that specific local news, which is what they're tuning in for in the morning. And then everything else is still really pushing digital.
So then you're like hyper niching that, right? Rather
Yes.
than just kind of spreading it across the board.
A little bit. We do both general campaigns and niche campaigns within socials. And because as good as social media and Google are at knowing every aspect of your life, you still may not have said anything about this artist that you like on there. And so we still do some generalized ads that hit just demographic and geographic without interests. And then we do about 1/3 of our spend on that on digital. And then the other 2/3 is dedicated niche spend, which highlights that same demographic, but with their specified interest fields.
I spent 6 months last year speaking specifically to the ages of 25 and 40 about their engagement in art, and they were specific not in the arts. Mm-hmm. Because I wanted to know, where do you get your information and how do you engage? How would you like to engage, etc. I was really surprised that the majority, if they're on social media, they're on only one channel. It's almost like that age group grew up with all of this coming out, that now that they're older, after college, they realize they want to actually experience something real in front of them rather than just, on their phone. So word of mouth marketing was big, but also, and you mentioned your work with libraries. They get their information from libraries or churches or community centers. Are you still continuing that kind of cross-promotional or collaborative work with other community stakeholders or organizations?
We do a fair amount with our library. We do a lot of cross-promotion there, but we're both city entities. It's so easy and it makes sense. We also do that with the youth centers, and there is a recreation center that's all within the city. And we do our best to do cross-promotion across those different fields and platforms. And then I 100% agree that word of mouth is still there, but that seed has to be planted somehow. And I feel like social media, not just social media, but Google advertising really permeates everyone, regardless of whether you're on a social media channel or not.
Talk a little bit about your mural painting. So you mentioned that you weren't in that. That wasn't your profession or where you came from, but now You're still doing that, and is it still a big part of the work that you do?
I absolutely love mural painting. I do it more privately now than for the center. The what I've found is, as a creative, as an artist, my background was lighting design, scene design, and that's where all of my passions lay before I became an administrator. And even after I became an administrator, it took me a really long time to let go of lighting design and that. And then when the opportunity presented itself for me to jump on and paint a mural, I went into it saying, hey, I'll paint some big blocks of color because that's going to be easy, and I'll do that to help you move this mural forward. I was working with a friend of mine, Sean Vincelette, on that first mural. And within 12 hours, I was hand painting lettering on the mural. And he was like, oh, so you're just doing big blocks of color, huh? And as soon as I got on that wall and had the brush in my hand, all of my training in scenic design and scenic painting really came right back to me. And so from there, it just took off. And I believe I've got 14 large murals under my belt at this point.
One of the things that I harp on all the time is the importance of showing the process to those that don't necessarily understand all of the components of art and what it takes to put a production on or install an exhibition. And you mentioned too earlier about when you were painting a mural, kind of that messy, dirty work is exposed out in the public. Was that a little bit of an aha moment for you there to see how much people enjoyed the process and seeing how something's getting made?
It took me a little while to realize how much people enjoyed the process. People posting their own updates daily, like people coming by to post their own updates of my work in the middle of the process, and watching other people on social media share my process, whether I was sharing it or not. Whenever I'm working on a piece, I will share a single picture daily of at the end of the process, but at minimum. I will often post a number of different things throughout the day while I'm painting, but at the end of the day, I will show the change that has happened from the day before. And I will also give a narrative to that change and where I'm at, what I was working on, and what those things mean to me and within the painting. And so all of those narrative posts have an insane amount of interaction to them. It's really hard for me to continue to engage in that because I think knowing what the end result is going to be, in my vision, all of those middle points are ugly because they aren't to what that final point's going to be. But people love all of it. But all of that messy middle gets so much interaction. People want something to talk about, and it gives them something to talk about.
Well, it makes them a part of the project as well. And that's the feeling that I get. So where do you post those, the process?
I post to my personal social media, Instagram, Facebook. When it was the Marion Cultural and Civic Center sponsoring and me doing everything on behalf of the Marion Cultural and Civic Center, I would post it to both the Civic Center's socials as well as my own socials. But socials is where all of the middle process happens. And then on my art website, I have a lot of process pictures on the dedicated pages for each piece because I want to keep them up there just so that people see how the process and what it went through.
As I was listening to you talk, I was thinking of this popularity of cooking shows or the baking, those contests where we're seeing the ugly. I think that's what people are fascinated with, is to see that the creation, that what you want this to turn out and look like at the end, but we're watching you work through that process.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I haven't thought of it in that way, and in the correlation to what's really mainstream popular like that right now. And that it really is those things that show all of the process.
I think of that way too when you deal with symphonies or any kind of artistic endeavor that you're spending countless hours working on that. Most of the time we focus on the end result, not realizing all of the mistakes or labor or problem solving that you're doing while you're going through that.
Yeah. And I kind of wonder with some of that. With me as the mural painter, I was 6 or 7 murals in before I even referred to myself as an artist. I've been an admin for almost 18 years. And so it took a really long time for me to accept that title or role of artist. And so I think it's so new to me that I'm not so precious about that process. And I wonder if there's something there with artists, musical artists and theater, dance, that they are so focused on the perfection and precision of their final product that there's a hesitancy in putting out anything of the rough unfinished. And within the industry, we have been tempered towards, you work towards perfection. You got, hey, here's your final dress week of a show. You've got 5 days to get it perfect. And we're not letting anybody in here for those dress unless they've paid an awful lot of money or they're a part of this process until that final product is ready and perfect.
So it's interesting because now my mind goes to Saturday Night Live. Why? I don't know. But and the phenomenon that it's been on for 50 years, they've got such a short amount of time to prepare. They do the dress before they go live. But part of the draw to it, I think, is that those imperfections that come through, or sometimes the skit just isn't that good or funny.
And one of the interesting things that there are entire channels on TikTok, Instagram, entire Reels channels dedicated to them breaking within Saturday Night Live skits.
Yeah.
And that some of the most popular things are when they break and when it's not perfect. And whenever you see them laughing within themselves and not being able to contain it within each other. And I think that's a really interesting thing because that them breaking is you seeing that process.
Right. So 2 previous conversations have now come to mind. But one, I was speaking with an academic. She's got a sociology background, and she has spent a lot of time researching failure and failure in art, and that we don't talk about or embrace failure. What would it look like as the creative sector to embrace failure a little bit more? Another conversation I had, we were talking about just the creative sector and how creatives are misunderstood. And he was talking about how creatives don't necessarily do a great job at explaining the complexity of the work. Mm-hmm. Whereas he made an analogy that if, a scientist was going after a big grant, they would propose 300 pages submission to a grant or funding to describe the complexity of that work that they're doing. Whereas, and this is very general, where the arts may put 2 or 3 paragraphs forward. And there's all of that interlinks together to a little bit about what you were saying about artists not wanting to expose themselves.
Yeah. And that's so one thing that changed my mindset, and this was January of 2020. The closing plenary for the APAP conference was Ben Folds. And Ben Folds talked about the freedom that is built within failure and someone giving you the freedom to fail as a way of moving forward and progressing. And he was specifically talking about, he does a thing where somebody yells, "Rock this bitch," in his concerts with symphony. And he will, on the spot, create a song calling out progressions to the symphony and then write the song as you're playing in front of you. And he said he's come up with some of his best stuff that has led to some great songs coming out of that because the audience has granted him permission to fail. Because he's not expected to, it's not expected to be good. It's just expected to be new and fresh. And by that freedom to fail, there's nothing holding him back from trying something different, trying something new with no expectation of it being good immediately.
And I wonder how much is it the audience giving permission or the artists being open to the audience witnessing the potential that this may not be good?
Well, and I think that's exactly what he was speaking to, is that them asking him to do something on the spot is an agreement moving forward. This doesn't have to be good. This just has to be now.
And I feel that could go to everything, meaning such the challenge within the arts that arts is for all, and we want to be accessible to everyone and all of these things, but yet there still is this prevailing feeling that arts is an elitist thing, or it's only for certain people, and that it's not for everyone. And maybe if we broke some of those traditional decades-long norms of what we've always done, do something a little bit different that fits where we are as a society today and wanting to be included and a part of it all.
Speaking of the symphonic world, as the symphonic world was moving forward, they were starting to do program notes digitally. And older patrons had a big problem with it because people had their phones out during the performances. And younger patrons saw absolutely nothing wrong with it. And so it created a generational divide and a problem for the symphonies to address, that they of course, a lot of their donors were these older patrons. But at the same time, to get a new audience in there, they had to open up to different aspects. And so I think it was Indianapolis Symphony started doing happy hour concerts that were mobile friendly initially. And they started doing things specifically catered to that demographic, which, I mean, it created two separate things. But this one, you knew what you were getting into, and you knew, hey, phones were going to be out, people were going to be interactive. And they even had interactive things built in to an app for people to interact with the concert with on their phones during the performance. And then they still had the stuff for the stuffy older patrons that wanted it to still be the same thing that it always had been, which was an elitist presentation of old European music and they found that they could do more modern music with the younger patrons without pushback than they could with the older patrons who wanted the classic European composers.
So if we're talking about older patrons, aging audiences always age. So again, is it the audience or is it the organization that sets up those expectations?
It's the organization that should set up the expectations. The same demographic, the same age group has been the age group that is going to age out, that we have to start reaching younger for the last 50 years. But it's been the same age group. It's been the same ages. And so what we saw in the 2000s was we had bands like Head East and early 80s bands, late 70s bands starting to do concerts with symphonies, rock pop concerts. And now we're seeing that go to the opposite direction, or continue to go in that direction. Cypress Hill just performed with the Nashville Symphony. And so we're now seeing artists that were really popular, hip-hop artists that were really popular in the early 2000s, late 1990s, that are now performing with these symphonies. So the symphonies have, for the last 30 years, have been doing the same thing to reach out and grab that younger audience. It's just the artists and the styles of music are changing. And so the industry as a whole for 50 years has said this is the same problem, but it needs to be accepted that this is the way that the generations progress, because this is when your kids have grown up, you have more expendable income. That age group is always going to be your core age group.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to shift now to your podcast. So you're a co-host of a podcast called There's No Business Like, which I love the name, and I'm a fan. You speak to people in the arts nationwide and probably beyond. What's the feeling now from a national perspective, given what we're seeing with policy and the whole DEI and all of that? Are you hearing conversations pop up across the country that...
I think these conversations are happening everywhere within this industry right now, because so much of it dives into national funding through the arts, through the NEA. We are actively watching. As we're recording this, yesterday, Hamilton pulled out of their 2026 run at the Kennedy Center. And they did so because they said this has historically always been bipartisan. Now that this is no longer a bipartisan-led venue that is just celebrating the arts of America, since it's no longer for all of us, we have no reason to be a part of it. That is a truncated statement from Jeffrey Seller, who is the lead producer for Hamilton. And it was a co-statement with him and Lin-Manuel Miranda. It's a two-edged sword. Having the opportunity to perform at the Kennedy Center for any artist and any tour has always felt like a prestigious thing. But now there's a dual implication of, are we aligning ourselves with an administration by performing there now? And does it still hold the same significance that it once did 2 months ago? We're just talking 2 months. And I think that's a really hard line for people to decide upon. And I've talked to a few different artists and agents who have had things there. Some people have still continued to perform there, but with anti-Trump t-shirts on or making statements during their performance. I think there's power in both of those. I think there's power in saying we're still going to perform here. We're still going to do it, but we're going to take advantage of this stage to have a message still come across from us. And there's also power in saying, some of the most prestigious things that you had coming up are no longer going to happen because we don't want to be aligned. From a funding standpoint, funding has guided things a lot historically. I mean, over the last 10 years, you always talked about how you're hitting diverse audiences, how you were using diverse performances. And that word alone, I think many people will fear to put into any grant application to the NEA at this point. Like, I don't think the word diverse or diversity will appear in most grant applications. And so funding has been used to guide social movement through the arts for a long time. It's just being guided in a different way now than it has been before.
Are you sensing organizations changing programming out of fear or frozen, afraid to speak up? I've had some organizations I've heard say, we'll just refuse the funding if they're going to dictate what our programming has to be.
I think a lot of that has to deal with how your budgets are structured, how much you really rely on it, what portion of your income comes from it. So do we take the money, adjust our programming to survive for now, or do we move forward and find a different way to balance or to make cuts to accommodate that loss in income? And I also think that there are many ways that you can move forward while still aligning to standards.
I think just even changing vocabulary, how you talk about the work that you're doing is one thing. I also think that it's an opportunity for funders to reevaluate some of the requirements. For example, I've had organizations who are in rural parts of the state that don't have a lot of diversity in those regions. So it's really hard for them to show that in an application when it's just not geographically viable.
Well, and with our mural programs here in Marion, we were turned down multiple times from the NEA because we didn't have a diverse enough audience for the arts program, because we're in a rural area that is not terribly diverse. So now, with that diversity in mind, here at the center, we have always programmed so that people can see diversity that they're not seeing in the community, because we feel a cultural responsibility to show the diversity that is throughout and present throughout the rest of the world. And there is a way to do that. That's not in our mission statement. That's not on our website, but it's been present within our programming and within what we've done within the community.
So you're getting denied because your audience isn't diverse enough?
Because the community itself isn't diverse enough to match the standards of the funding.
It's not a one size fits all, and that we need to look at the communities that are putting forth and what your demographics really are, and that you don't have the capability of reaching those audiences because they don't exist where you are. But I find it really interesting to hear you say that your programming is diverse purposefully to give exposure to, which I think is something really good, and that should be commended and celebrated.
Well, and cultural is in our name, and presenting cultures that are outside of the standard culture of the Southern Illinois community is a responsibility that we have in opening the eyes, especially within student programming, to opening the eyes to the children of our community to what is out there and what is part of this world.
Yeah. Josh, this has been a great conversation. I appreciate your time.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. And I will put all of your information in the show notes. But for those of you listening, go check out Josh's podcast with his co-hosts called There's No Business Like.
There's
Thanks,
no business
Josh.
like. You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Arts Redefined with Angela Meleca. Thank you for being an essential part of our community. If you've made it this far in today's episode, I guess you found value in it. Please share it with others who you think would find value too. Every share and like helps us grow and reach more leaders like you. Let's keep challenging the status quo and driving innovation together. Until next time, stay engaged and keep redefining the arts.